Hey guys, so YCS Las Vegas just concluded, so I can finally make this tier list by the data video as usual. In terms of the formula score calculation, you can check my older videos, I'll link it down below. I've been doing it every month for like a year. I don't really want to repeat myself too much. And so, of course, before we continue, just a big thanks to my sponsors as usual. Discount codes in the description below. Before we begin, of course, there are some limitations with YGeoScope, which is where I use the data to make these tier list videos. For the most part, a lot of the decks that were previously not identified can be now, because I had reached out to the creator of YGeoScope. For example, like Kashtira is a big one. Labyrinth, I did mention it back then as well. Unfortunately, it still cannot be identified, so I did shoot him another message to try to identify this. There's some other decks as well, like Springans, Scareclaw, as well as Ninjas, which has gotten some recent hype, especially with Jesse Khan playing it at Vegas. But you know, stay tuned for those. Hopefully they can also be identified. So let's get right into the tier list. And so starting off, of course, it's Kashtira. You know, it had the most YCS top cut representation. It was also a 3v3, by the way. And so, you know, it's a very strong deck. You've seen the final stream. You know, he locked like 9 zones. It was also played quite a lot on Dueling Book. And the match win percentage, 63%, is rather high. If you watch my tier meta history, top decks, you'll know that tier 1 decks are usually at the 60% range, and it's just an incredibly not the most fun deck to play against, because it sort of relies on you to draw unsearchable outs to have a chance against this deck. But if you've watched that game 2 with John, that Nibiru, it's pretty crazy. The next deck is branded, and I'm really happy to be proven wrong, because in my meta-analysis of top ranked player videos, I did kind of comment on how this deck seemed a little fragile, but clearly, you know, it can still do very well. I mean, who knows moving forward with if more people try to side against this, and it can get rather difficult because D-Berry or Ash is rather impactful against this deck. But nonetheless, it has some plays around that, and you've seen you know, some of the things like Aqua Dolphin, which actually is funny. In that last video a couple days ago, I had commented about that as being one of the tech that I learned personally from someone else, and I'm just glad that it actually did see play and it wasn't just some really, you know, unnecessary jank. So it's really cool. Win percentage wise, 55%, a lot of YCS top cut, and it's just a very versatile deck. It has a high ceiling. People love their fusions, and I think it's a really cool deck, and it's only going to get better with Cyberstorm Axis once that comes out. And while I don't actually have the data for this, I decided to still go with and put Labyrinth on here, because I thought it'd be just unfair to not put it. It had a lot of top cut representation in terms of, for example, Ryan Yu and his team. Ryan particularly was playing this deck and was playing really well. I think he actually went individual record-wise undefeated. Really strong trap deck, can just search a lot of, you know, one of like really strong traps like Eradicator, for example, D-Barrier, things like that. It's insane. It's while people normally don't really like trap decks, I think it is definitely kind of cool that a trap deck in today's age is actually meta. We also have Spright, and so this is a deck I know I'm personally still playing as well. I think in regional level events the same weekend as this YCS Vegas, I think it was doing pretty well actually. Some people are just not playing the Toad route at all and just going for more of a kind of a lock. I saw Dinkang Fam, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that name properly. He had, I think, like Camouflage Goliath as well as Ryo in his main deck, so that's really cool. I think it's still a solid deck. It's a very consistent deck, so it's something that's nice. And what I really like about Sprite is that it doesn't necessarily have a really bad matchup against most of the relevant decks, at least. So, you know, it's very versatile. It's easy to play. That's another good part about this deck. And yeah, it's still top to YCS. There's also Runic Spread as well. Swordsoul, probably you'll see more of this deck topping. Definitely a regional. I know at least one regional that happened this past weekend, like someone won with Swordsoul. Very, very consistent deck as well. Also, unfortunately, kind of gets impacted by D-Barrier because of branded. Sort of going back to that like last spring format, but it's pretty good going second as well. Like the Tenyis are really good for that. And yeah, I mean, it's a fan favorite deck. It's a popular deck. Its win percentage is solid, and I think it's gonna do well in events moving forward. So on to tier 2, we have just how YGeoScope defines as runic. This is a little vague because this can include runic Spright. But there's other runic strategies, and I think it's still fair to, you know, put them as a category of its own in a tier list, with the grave shufflers now being limited and tier limits just dropping a lot in play. Like Runic has gotten indirectly much stronger, and it's a very, very strong field spell. The Hugin can also protect it from something like card destruction. Just a lot of draws while they do have to give up their battle phase, and it does require players to be able to, think ahead a few turns ahead, as well as, just managing resources. But it's if you know how to pilot it well, it's a really strong deck, and it just, all the Runic cards can basically do everything, right? Like pop spell trap or monster or negate a monster, or like things like that, and banishing the opponent's deck, kind of like Kashtira, I guess, but before them, it's kind of detrimental. And then we have Math Mech, and this is, if you saw my Rogue tier list by that video a few days ago, this actually ended up being first, so maybe I shouldn't have put it in that video to begin with if it's not Rogue anymore. But, it did not have YCS tops, but that's not really fair to say either, because, I think once you get sort of maybe the top individual YCS level events, maybe it'll still get some. I'm sure at regional events it's probably still doing fine. And the win percentage at 67% is actually pretty insane, especially because this is actually now based on like over 1,000 matches for MathMech, so it's actually a pretty decent sample size. So it's pretty impressive. It did kind of completely die out when the Bestials and the Shizu Shufflers kind of game came into the game, but now those are sort of out of the mix. But of course Kashtira is kind of a hard matchup, I would assume, because of the banish. But I think it's really cool that MathMech has come back. And then speaking of tier elements, they're still here. I think they're categorized as tier 2 because a lot of players, especially at the beginning of this format, are still trying to experiment with it. Now, if it actually ends up being pretty good still, and it probably is, to be honest with you. But at the same time, once this initial hype dies on, maybe people give up on tier elements, and then it'll just keep falling into the tiers, into Rogue. The win percentage at 49%, that's definitely a big drop from whatever 60+% it was before. But I think, it lost a lot of names. It's definitely a different way to play tier elements, but I think as a package it could still work. Like some people put it in branded as well, with Sharon being able to, for example, just at least like pitch like Edgem chains, or I know a lot of people cut the Edgem the Frightfur package, but just things like that. It can provide another fusion play, particularly when you get Ash on branded fusion. And then we have Dark World. So this is interesting. I think people were saying this is another deck that, kind of indirectly got better with tier elements out of the mix, as well as like whatever. But I think obviously the Shifter Kashtira stuff will hamper it. But, I think it's cool. I don't know too much about Dark World. I know I actually played against this a couple weeks ago at regional, so it was really, really cool. Definitely another deck that's not really the most fun to play against, because it's sort of like they're just playing on their own for like 15 minutes for their combo. But all in all, I think it's still cool to see a deck like Dark World being played a lot, even after the initial hype of the structure decks being released. And then we have Drytron, which is another fan favorite deck, and so this again, same story for a lot of these decks. Grave Shufflers, Bestials, kind of out of the mix, makes it good for a lot of decks. And so Drytron, they do have Ben 10 to 3 still, so it's solid. The win percentage 58%, that's also solid. I don't think we saw too much YCS. I don't think they topped. I can't remember. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I guess they didn't, because I have it right here. But I'm sure at regional level events for sure they'll do something, and probably maybe top of YCS here and there. Then Sky Striker, another fan favorite. So this is pretty solid, although the win percentage 45%, it's been struggling lately. This was actually around similar win percentage as it was like the previous formats, even with like the Bestials and Grave Shufflers everywhere. But you know what, they also got triple tactic thrust, which means they can get another way to get into engage, especially because this is a going second deck, so that card is probably a lot more live in this deck, especially to be able to actually play it the same turn in terms of whatever spell traps you search. So that's really nice. I did recently do a Sky Striker profile. My friend Chi, who went undefeated at locals with it. I know it's just locals, but you know what, there's not a lot of events right now in our area in terms of regionals. So yeah, definitely go check that out. And then onto Rogue, we do have Fluanderies, which has sort of fallen into this category now that Windberry statue has been banned, but who knows, you know what, maybe they'll go back up. I think it's still a pretty solid deck, but of course people kind of regard it as sort of like a worse version of Kashtira. It's another shifter deck, the original shifter deck. Well, I shouldn't say original, but win percentage 64%, that's actually still pretty insane. Really, really good. This deck actually had, one of the best win percentages in the past year among the meta decks in history. If you saw that video that I made, you'll see that. Not the most fun deck to play against, but it's still solid, and I guess other than Pot of Prosperity is probably pretty budget. And then we have Punk, which has been getting popularity lately, especially I think Gold Pride, or Pride, I don't know if that's the right one, Gold Pride Punk. So think it's cool. It's initially was used as sort of like this package to get into like Chaos Ruler and a lot of different decks. Nowadays, you know, it's just sort of played on its own. Draws a lot. Very fun synchro strategy. You do burn yourself a lot though, so in time it's one of the worst decks probably after Dinomorphia in terms of time, not in terms of overall level. Then we have Bestial Dragon. This actually has a pretty solid win percentage of 59%, but seems to have dropped quite a bit. I think, you know, it's still pretty solid. Dragons, I think Konami always provides a lot of support for this deck, so I think you can be pretty confident that it's a good investment. Like, if you invested it a while back in its tier 1 days, like, you definitely had a really good run with it, and I'm sure it'll come back to, you know, at least tier 2 status at some point. And yeah, I mean, I guess Kashtira is not the best matchup. Like, anything with Shifter is usually pretty detrimental for Dragons because they're very grave heavy. But yeah, I mean, I guess they do play Gamma and things like that, but I'm not sure if that's enough. And then we have Plunder Patrol. So that's they did get that Earth ship in the new set. So I'm not sure if we're seeing too much play of this. It is pretty solid. When the adventure token stuff first came out, it was seeing some regional success as well, and I'm sure we'll see that continuing forward. Pretty cool gimmick in terms of, you know, equipping themselves to ships, and I think it's just a solid strategy. And then we then have Tri Brigade, which has been tier 2 for quite some time, even in that, you know, previous format, but now that like Kashtira, you know, banishing everything as well as Shifter, not the best for Tri Brigade. So it's definitely seems to be struggling, like, you know, 49% win percentage. But also I should note, there's this one lore video that I recently saw. It's like an hour long. If you have the time, I highly recommend it. It's really cool. Covers like the Fallen of Albaz lore, which includes, you know, the Tri Brigades, the Springans, Spright, Swordsoul even, branded. I didn't even know that they were all related. Really cool. I'll link that down below. Definitely go check that out. We also have Dinosaur, kind of struggling, 45%. I don't know if we saw too much of Lancia being cited or main decked in the YCS Las Vegas. I'll do a top cut breakdown of most played hand traps and staples very soon, but that's where I thought maybe Dinos would struggle indirectly, because Lancia does hurt this, at least pure kind of traditional going second Dinos. And so if Lancia is played a lot, then yeah, Dino's probably struggling. But, you know, it's a fan favorite rogue choice. I'm sure a lot of people will still play it no matter what, and it'll come back to relevancy, hopefully, once Mist comes back. Although I'm not really sure if I want to come back. And then we have Hero, another fan favorite deck. This was actually the most played rogue deck for last format because it had a good matchup against tier elements, at least if, you know, Heroes went first, because Darklaw is just so strong, banishing everything, kind of like what Kashtira Rise Art was doing. But now the best deck in the format is Kashtira, which also has their own walking macrocosmos, which means Darklaw is just irrelevant. So it's probably the drop down a lot in play, but, you know, usually the hero players are like the very hardcore fans, and they'll play it no matter what. And it's still a very solid deck, very solid rogue strategy, and, you know, lots of combo lines, and can even also, you can play it as a going second build. We also have Marincess, so this is interesting. 56% win percentage, pretty solid. I'm not sure if it's really played too much, but, you know, there's usually that one Marincess player that's kind of high ranked on Dueling Book. I did a deck profile of his list a couple times actually. Maybe I'll get another one if he's still grinding DB. But really cool, makes use of Zealantis, the Link 4, really well in terms of like banishing everything and then trying to special things back, but because you know, they're like waterlogged because of Marincess, your opponent doesn't get them back. So I think that's a really cool interaction with Zealantis. Really the deck that made most of it. Draco Slayers did make most of use that card as well, but not nearly to the effectiveness. And then finally onto the other category, we have Dogmatica, and this is sort of like the pure one because they did get new support in Photon Hypernova. And so if you saw my meta-analysis of top ranked players, one of the top ranked players in top 50 actually was running pure Dogmatica. I think that's really cool. I'm not too familiar with what they do. I'm guessing it's like a very anti-extra deck kind of focus strategy, but I think it's cool. And again, check out that lore video. I'll link down below. Really cool stuff on Dogmatica. And then finally, we have Salamangreat, which has been falling lately. I mean, they were never affected by the Bestials to begin with. The Grave Shufflers being kind of gone is very nice for this deck. But again, like Kashtira banishing Salamangreat, that doesn't really bode well with them. But it is a fun rogue deck. It's pretty budget, if I remember. It used to be just like the Axis Code Talker was the most expensive one, but that at least got reprinted. So you know what, it's a pretty fun deck to play. There's a person at my locals, Carson. I did a profile with him. He usually plays Salad a lot. And so, you know, yeah, maybe Gazelle will finally come back to 3. I think it should. It's not really doing anything, but yeah, that's it for the tier list. So thanks again for watching. I'm trying to do this kind of freestyle now instead of doing voiceovers. Let me know if you prefer the voiceover way. It's certainly shorter, I believe, but this is certainly a lot more easier for me. So thanks again to all my Patreons, and well, take care, guys.